Before skyscrapers touched the clouds and bullet trains stitched cities together in blurs of steel and light, there was a single river winding silently through misty valleys. It cradled the first villages, whispered stories to the wind, and nourished the roots of one of the world's most enduring civilizations. This is not merely a tale of emperors and dynasties. It is the dreamlike origin of China, born in mud, mystery, and stars. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's somewhat comforting to imagine all of us scattered across the globe, quietly unwinding together. So breathe deeply, settle in, and allow the mysteries of time and space to cradle your imagination. For in the quiet hours of the night, under the same stars watched by our ancestors, the secrets of long-lost civilizations await, patiently, quietly, like ancient stars still shining from light years away. Let's begin. The sky is soft this evening. A pale blush spreads across the horizon, fading gently into shades of lavender and gold. The air carries the scent of fresh earth, touched by the breath of an ancient wind. You stand on the banks of a river that whispers as it moves, slow, silken, and eternal. This is the Yellow River, or Huang He, often called the Mother River of China. It curves through loess-rich valleys like a golden thread stitched into the fabric of time. Thousands of years ago, in this very landscape, people began to settle. They built small clusters of homes out of timber, thatch, and clay. They domesticated animals. They planted seeds of millet in soft soil, praying for gentle rains and merciful seasons. These were the first sparks of settled life, flickering to life in the heart of Neolithic China. The earliest cultures to emerge in this fertile land were the Peiligang and Qishan. Around 8,000 years ago, they laid down roots in the valleys of the Yellow River, forming communities that grew crops, raised pigs and chickens, and fished in the river's calm shallows. They created grinding stones to process grains, fashioned bone tools for daily use, and began to shape their relationship with the land, not as wanderers, but as stewards. As twilight deepens across the plain, you can almost hear the murmur of those early villages, the soft scraping of stone tools, the rhythmic pounding of grain, the occasional bark of a dog. Life was simple, but not primitive. It was ordered, cyclical, and deeply connected to the flow of nature. Among the most significant cultures to flourish in this time was the Yang Shao, beginning around 5000 BCE. Their settlements were remarkably sophisticated for the era. At Banpo, near present-day Xi'an, archaeologists have uncovered homes built in semi-subterranean pits, encircled by ditches for drainage and defense. The people lived communally, sharing labor and resources. They cultivated millet, raised silkworms, and made distinctive pottery. Red vessels adorned with black geometric patterns, symbols of their emerging identity. The pottery wasn't merely functional, it was expressive. Swirls and fishbone motifs, painted by hand, captured a worldview that was rhythmic and harmonious. It spoke of a people attuned to the cycles of planting and harvest, of death and rebirth. These designs would echo, faint but enduring, through the centuries of Chinese art to come. And then, to the east and south, near the edges of the lower Yangtze River, other people were also carving out their lives. The Hemudu and Majiabang cultures cultivated rice in waterlogged paddies. They built stilted houses above the wet earth and developed tools made from polished stone, shell, and bone. Their world was lush and green, filled with reeds and birdsong, with wide rivers and soft rains. Here, rice farming blossomed, an innovation that would one day feed millions. Wherever you wandered in this ancient land, you would find people adapting to their environment with creativity and care. In some regions, they buried their dead with jade pendants, pottery, and animal bones, perhaps in hopes of comfort in the next world. In others, They built raised granaries to protect their stores through harsh winters. These scattered cultures were not yet unified, but they were undeniably Chinese in the making, layer by layer, story by story. And yet, for all the material evidence left behind, perhaps the most poetic legacy of Neolithic China is the one etched into the bones of the land itself. The lowest plateaus hold secrets. The river winds in silence. And within the tombs and hearths, 1,000 years of quiet belief takes shape. The people believed in spirits, in ancestors who lingered near hearth fires, in unseen forces that guided the sun's path and the river's rage. It was a world alive with presence. Over time, these beliefs began to formalize into rituals. Animal bones were heated until they cracked, an early form of divination that would become central to Chinese culture for centuries. These early symbols, scratched into shell and bone, may well be the ancestors of Chinese writing itself. They prayed for rain, for fertility, for safe passage across seasons and generations, and the gods, or perhaps the ancestors, answered them in the language of weather and fire, of health and harvest. There was no sharp line between the natural and the sacred. All was interconnected. As we sit now beneath a wide and star-speckled sky, the land stretches out before us in quiet dignity. You can imagine the faint glow of hearth fires in the distance, the rustle of wind through crops, the lull of crickets singing in the long grass, a baby's soft cry, the clink of stone against stone. It was a world without haste, where days rose and fell with the sun, and the mysteries of life were accepted with reverence rather than certainty. By 3000 BCE, these cultures began to merge. Innovations spread. Rice and millet fields multiplied. Pottery and jade grew more refined. Communities expanded into small towns. And from this quiet flowering of agriculture and artistry, from these riverbanks lined with reed and story, the great dynasties of China would one day rise. But for now, we remain in this gentle beginning. We sit with the ancestors in the twilight of time. We watch the yellow river flow on, as it always has, carrying silt, secrets, and the first dreams of a civilization that would endure for thousands of years. Rest here a while longer. The fire is warm, the river is singing, and the story is only just beginning. The night deepens around you now. The air has cooled, but the earth still holds the sun's warmth. A faint mist drapes across the river valley, silver in the moonlight, like silk unraveled from the heavens. Somewhere nearby, a fire crackles softly, and from the shadows, an elder leans forward to speak. The voice is calm, weathered, and filled with memory. A story begins, not written in books or carved in stone, but carried in the rhythm of words passed from mouth to ear across centuries. It is the tale of a man who tamed the floodwaters and a dynasty said to be the first in all of China. The Xia. Long before written records marked time with certainty, long before emperors ruled from walled capitals, there was Yu the Great. He was no ordinary man, the storytellers say. He walked the land for years, studying the rivers and mountains, learning their moods and movements. The floods were devastating then, wild, unpredictable, and deadly. Villages would vanish beneath water overnight, crops drowned, lives were swept away like leaves. But Yu did not try to block the waters with force. He watched, he listened, and slowly he guided the rivers to new paths, digging canals and channels that allowed the water to flow rather than resist. This was the wisdom of harmony over domination, a lesson echoed through Chinese philosophy for thousands of years. Yu's success was not just an engineering triumph, it was morale. It showed that a leader must serve the people and the land alike. And so, the people crowned him king, not for conquest, but for compassion. Thus, the Xia Dynasty was born, or so the legend goes. But was it only a legend? This question lingers like incense in the air. For centuries, scholars debated whether the Zhou truly existed or whether they were myth, invented by later dynasties to explain their own beginnings. And yet, in recent decades, archaeologists have uncovered the ruins of Erlitou, a Bronze Age city in the Henan province that dates roughly to the time the Xia were said to have ruled. Streets, palaces, bronze tools, jade artifacts all suggest a complex centralized society. Erlitou had a palace compound built on rammed earth platforms, surrounded by workshops and homes. Bronze smelting took place here, alongside the production of jade, turquoise, and ceramics. Horses and chariots were used, and nearby burial sites show early signs of social hierarchy. It is not definitive proof, but it is a whisper from the past, one that aligns softly with the old stories. What we do know is that the Xia, whether mythical or real, represent a transition, a shift from scattered Neolithic cultures to a unified vision of leadership, ritual, and order. They are the bridge between the first villages and the first dynasties. It is here we first see the emergence of hereditary rule, where leadership passed from father to son. This idea, so common to us now, was still new in the ancient world. The Xia kings ruled in succession, with names like Qi, Tai Kang, and Kong Jia appearing in the Bamboo Annals, an ancient chronicle preserved for centuries. These names may have been shaped by generations of storytelling, but they form a thread, woven tightly into China's cultural memory. With each generation, rituals grew more formal. The people offered jade and food to the heavens and the earth. They observed celestial events, perhaps beginning to track the movements of the stars and planets with reverence and awe. The connection between ruler and cosmos was slowly forming, an idea that would become central to Chinese kingship for millennia. The Xia dynasty is also associated with the development of bronze metallurgy, a hallmark of the ancient Chinese world. Although the full flowering of bronze culture would come with the Shang, the seeds were planted here. Simple vessels and tools gave way to more sophisticated casting techniques. Bronze became more than utility, it became ceremonial. And in that ceremonial use, the earliest expressions of power and belief were forged in metal. As you drift through this ancient chapter, imagine the scene: a ruler in a flowing robe of hemp or silk, standing before an altar of smooth stone. A bronze vessel glimmers in the firelight, filled with millet wine. Around him, the quiet of night. Above, the constellations wheel in solemn procession. He raises his hands not to command, but to offer, to the earth, to the river, to the sky. In this moment, kingship is not authority, but responsibility. Of course, not all was golden in the age of the Xia. As with any dynasty, decline came. Later stories speak of a final king, Ji of Xia, who ruled with cruelty and indulgence. He is said to have taxed the people heavily, drowned himself in luxury, and turned away from the principles of virtue and service that had defined his ancestors. In time, rebellion stirred. A rival, Tang of Shang, rose against him and overthrew the Xia, marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. Whether fact, fiction, or something in between, the story of the Xia is the story of origins, of the first attempts at kingship, of the earliest rituals that tied heaven to earth, of floods tamed and power restrained by wisdom, and of the idea that a ruler is not simply a man of strength, but a servant of balance and harmony. As the wind moves gently through the grass, and the last embers of your fire flicker low, think of those first kings whose names now drift between truth and legend. Think of rivers shaped by calloused hands, of a people learning, slowly, how to live together, of myths that became memory and memory that became history. And now, with the river calm and the stars overhead blinking softly through the haze, let us move forward, for just beyond the bend of time, a new dynasty rises, shaped in bronze and bone, lit by ritual fires that will burn for centuries to come. The horizon is still dark, but the first traces of morning stir within the sky, a faint shimmer of indigo turning slowly to slate grey. You stand in a quiet clearing, surrounded by earth once walked by kings and priests, where rituals once filled the dawn with firelight and sacred chants. In your hand, you hold a piece of bone, smooth, ancient, and etched with tiny symbols. It hums with purpose, like a message whispered from the past. This is an oracle bone, and it carries the breath of a civilization that has awakened from legend into history. Welcome to the time of the Shang. The Shang Dynasty is the first dynasty in China whose existence is supported by both archaeological evidence and written records. Its story rises from the fertile lands around the Yellow River, where early cities were laid out with precision, walls were built to keep order, and rituals governed daily life. From around 1600 BCE, the Shang kings ruled with a sense of spiritual authority, believing themselves to be the bridge between heaven and earth. At the heart of Shang culture was divination, the reading of signs from the spirit world. Ox scapulae and turtle plastrons were used in ceremonies. Questions were carved into the bones. Will it rain tomorrow? Will the harvest be good? Should we go to war? Then the bones were heated until they cracked, and the patterns of the cracks were read like cosmic fingerprints. The answers were recorded beside the questions in neat script, the earliest known form of Chinese writing. These inscriptions, fragile and worn by time, now offer us a window into the hopes, fears, and daily lives of people who lived over 3,000 years ago. But the Shang were more than spiritual intermediaries. They were masters of bronze. They developed sophisticated techniques of casting bronze using piece mold methods, allowing them to produce vessels of astonishing complexity and beauty. These vessels were not merely decorative, they were sacred tools used in rituals to honor ancestors and communicate with the divine. Their surfaces were adorned with tao tie, mysterious animal faces with wide eyes and curling horns, symbols whose meanings remain debated, but whose presence commands attention. Imagine standing in a Shang ancestral hall as dusk falls. Bronze vessels flicker in the torchlight. Priests chant invocations to spirits long past. The smell of burning offerings rises into the night air. These ceremonies were not only acts of remembrance but essential to maintaining the balance between the living and the dead, between the mortal world and the heavens. The Shang believed their ancestors held power in the spirit realm, and it was through them that the world remained in harmony. The Shang capital was not a single place, but a succession of cities, each built as the court moved or the dynasty evolved. Among them was Yinshu, near modern-day Anyang, which served as one of the final and most important capitals. Here, grand palaces were constructed on platforms of packed earth, and royal tombs were dug deep into the ground, filled with chariots, jade, and human sacrifices. Servants and concubines buried alongside their king to serve him in the afterlife. In one of these tombs, belonging to Fu Hao, a consort of King Wu Ding, archaeologists uncovered a rare and compelling story. Unlike most queens of the ancient world, Fu Hao was a general and a priestess, leading troops into battle and conducting rituals to the ancestors. Her tomb was untouched by looters and filled with treasures: 468 bronze objects, 755 jade carvings, and over 6,000 cowrie shells used as currency. She is remembered not as an ornament of the court, but as a figure of real power, silent testimony to the complexity of Shang society. Life for ordinary people in the Shang world was built around farming, craftwork, and family. They grew millet and wheat, raised pigs and dogs, and lived in homes made of wood and thatch. They wove cloth, carved bone, and worked in small workshops producing pottery, tools, and ornaments. Though they lived far from the grandeur of the royal court, their daily rhythms mirrored the cycles of the earth and sky, the harvest and the flood. As the Shang grew in strength, they also grew in complexity. Trade networks extended beyond their borders, exchanging goods with neighboring cultures. War became more organized, with chariots drawn by horses, new to China, clattering across dusty plains. Society was clearly stratified, with kings at the top, followed by nobles, artisans, farmers, and slaves. Yet all were bound by the shared rituals of the Shang worldview, by the same offerings of wine and grain, by the same bronze vessels glinting in firelight. Central to the Shang ideology was the notion that the king ruled not by force alone, but by virtue of a sacred relationship with the heavens and the ancestors. It was a fragile and sacred trust. If the harvest failed, or war brought ruin, it could be seen as a sign that the ruler had lost favor with the spirits. This concept, though still forming, laid the groundwork for the later doctrine known as the Mandate of Heaven, which would shape Chinese politics for centuries. As you stand once more in the quiet field where the Shang once ruled, the air is cool against your skin. The stars above shimmer in patterns the Shang might have watched in wonder. The earth beneath your feet is layered with history, with stories of kings and bones, of bronze and beliefs. You hear the faint echo of drums, the low murmur of ancient prayers. They have faded from memory, but not from the land. The Shang Dynasty lasted for more than 500 years, but eventually cracks began to form within the court, the rituals, and the kingdom itself. A new power, rising in the west, would challenge the Shang's divine authority and reshape the very notion of kingship. But for now, the bronze vessels still gleam, the oracle bones still speak, and the spirits of the ancestors linger in the hush of twilight. Let us walk slowly now toward the next dawn, toward a dynasty that will last even longer and whose philosophy will echo across the ages. A pale sun rises over a wide open plain, painting the grasslands in delicate shades of silver and gold. You are standing on a hilltop, overlooking a distant settlement. Smoke rises softly from earthen rooftops, curling upward into the morning air like a prayer. Somewhere nearby, a bell chimes, deep, sonorous, echoing across the land, like a call from the heavens. This is the age of the Zhou, and with it begins one of the most profound chapters in China's history. When the Shang Dynasty began to weaken, burdened by internal strife and decadent rulers, a new power was quietly gathering in the west. The Zhou people had long lived on the fringes of Shang influence, watching, learning, and preparing. They were organized, devout, and united by strong familial bonds. Led by King Wen, and later his son, King Wu, they believed their time had come. Their justification was not merely political or military, it was cosmic. They declared that the Shang had lost the favor of the heavens. The people suffered, the rituals faltered, the king had become corrupt. Therefore, they said, the divine had chosen a new ruling house. This sacred approval became known as the Mandate of Heaven, a concept that would shape the next 3,000 years of Chinese governance. The Mandate of Heaven was more than just a divine endorsement. It was a moral contract. A ruler was not chosen because of birthright alone, but because of virtue. If the ruler became cruel, unjust, or failed to care for the people, heaven would withdraw its support, and chaos, famine, or rebellion would follow. The mandate could be lost and given to another. This idea introduced both a spiritual justification for rule and a quiet mechanism for revolution. It was both stabilizing and subversive, just as easily used by rebels as by emperors. And it gave the people a language to make sense of the world when their rulers failed them. With the Shang overthrown at the Battle of Muye, the Zhou established their new capital at Haojing, near modern-day Xi'an. From there, they built a state rooted in ritual, morality, and hierarchy. Their government was structured as a feudal system, with loyal families and lords granted land in exchange for service. These regional lords, or Zhou, would rule semi-independently, but owed allegiance to the Zhou king, who sat at the top of a carefully tiered structure. It was a society ordered like the cosmos, harmonious, balanced, and hierarchical. Just as heaven ruled over earth, the king ruled over the realm. Just as parents guided children, elders guided the young. Everything had its place, and each relationship carried responsibility. Music, ceremony, and propriety became the foundations of this moral order. Ritual was not mere theatre, it was the rhythm of life itself. Great bronze bells and chimes were struck during ancestral rites. Elaborate dances told stories of cosmic harmony. The Book of Songs, or Shijing, preserved hundreds of early Zhou poems, songs of love, harvest, war, and longing, offering us glimpses of ordinary life and royal ritual alike. In these verses, we hear not the voice of kings, but of farmers planting millet, of women weaving in the light of dawn, of travelers longing for home. The Zhou may have ruled from palaces, but their legacy also lives in the quiet details of daily life, in the echo of footsteps across ancestral halls, in the steam rising from cooking pots at dusk. As centuries passed, however, the delicate balance began to strain. The Zhou kings gradually lost real control over their regional lords. Loyalty faded into ambition. The fiefdoms grew stronger, more independent, more willing to act on their own. In 770 BCE, after a devastating raid on the capital by Western tribes and rebellious lords, the Zhou court was forced to relocate east to Luoyang. This marks the beginning of the Eastern Zhou period, a time when the dynasty still existed in name, but its authority had become fragile, its voice soft and often ignored. And so began an era of political fragmentation and philosophical flowering. The Eastern Zhou period is divided into two great epochs, the Spring and Autumn period and the Warring States period. During these centuries, dozens of small kingdoms vied for dominance, their alliances shifting like wind across reeds. Battles flared and died like lightning across the land. Yet out of this instability came something remarkable. In response to chaos, thinkers turned inward, rulers invited scholars to their courts, seeking wisdom to guide their kingdoms. The result was an explosion of philosophy, debate, and reflection that would define Chinese civilization for millennia. It is here that the seeds of Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism take root. But we shall drift more deeply into that garden of thought in our next chapter. For now, linger in this moment between unity and division, between virtue and ambition. The Zhou dynasty had endured longer than any before it, over 800 years in name, and though its power faded, its ideals endured. As the wind brushes over the tall grasses of the eastern plains, imagine the flicker of a lantern in a scholar's window, the soft hush of silk robes sweeping over stone floors, the scent of ink and candle wax. Somewhere in a quiet hall, a young student recites verses from the Book of Songs, his voice clear, his heart full of wonder. And far beyond, in the heavens above, the stars still turn, watching patiently over the ever-turning wheel of dynasties. Let us follow that turning now toward the philosophers, sages, and poets who would emerge from the storm, carrying with them the dreams of peace in a fractured world. The sky hangs heavy tonight, soft and starless, like a curtain drawn across the heavens. The world feels still, as though holding its breath. You find yourself in a lantern-lit study, its wooden beams warm with age, and the scent of ink lingering in the air. A lone scholar sits beneath a flickering flame, brush poised above paper thinking. Outside, the land trembles with conflict, but inside, the mind searches for harmony. This is the age of the 100 schools of thought, a golden bloom of wisdom born from the soil of war. By the 6th century BCE, the Zhou kings were kings in name only. Their once great authority had fractured into competing states, each ruled by ambitious warlords. It was a time of shifting borders and endless battles, of alliances made and broken with the turning of the seasons. The spring and autumn period slowly gave way to the darker warring states era, where 7 dominant kingdoms, Qi, Chu, Yan, Han, Zhou, Wei, and Qin, vied for supremacy across the Chinese landscape. But in times of chaos, the mind often turns inward. As swords clashed in distant fields, a quiet revolution stirred, not of weapons, but of words. It was during this age of unrest that China witnessed an intellectual awakening unlike any other in its history. Thinkers, sages, mystics, and scholars emerged, each offering their own path to peace, order, and understanding. At the heart of this blossoming was a man named Kongzi, known to the West as Confucius. Born in 551 BCE in the state of Lu, he was a humble teacher with a profound belief in the power of virtue. To him, society could be healed not by laws or violence, but by the cultivation of character. He taught that a ruler must lead by moral example, that children must honor their parents, and that ritual, propriety, and self-discipline were the keys to a harmonious world. Confucius saw society as a great family, each person with a role, each role with a duty. If the father was kind, the son would be filial. If the ruler was just, the people would follow. This concept of ren, or humaneness, became the soul of his philosophy. And though Confucius never saw great power in his lifetime, his teachings would echo through imperial courts and humble classrooms for over 2,000 years. Yet Confucius was only one voice in a crowded hall of thought. In contrast to the structure and order of Confucianism, there emerged the soft, flowing wisdom of Taoism. Attributed to the sage Laozi, the Tao Te Ching offered a vision of the world not as something to control, but to yield to. The Tao, or Wei, was the natural order of all things, unseen, unknowable, but ever-present. The Taoist sage does not strive, he flows. He bends like bamboo in the wind. In this worldview, stillness is strength, and those who do nothing often achieve the most. Imagine walking alone through a mountain forest at dawn, mist curling around the trunks of ancient pines. There are no roads, no maps, only the quiet whisper of the wind and the path beneath your feet. This is the Tao, not a rule to follow, but a current to float within. It asks nothing but awareness, presence, and peace. Elsewhere, in the halls of political power, a more pragmatic school of thought was taking hold: legalism. Thinkers like Han Fexi argued that people were inherently selfish and chaotic, and that strong laws and harsh punishments were the only way to maintain order. Where Confucians trusted virtue and Taoists sought balance, legalists believed in control. The ruler was above all, unquestioned and absolute. It was a cold philosophy perhaps, but also an effective one, especially for rulers trying to unify a fragmented land. And there were more still. Mohism, founded by Mozi, rejected the elaborate rituals of Confucius and called for universal love, a radical notion in a time of warfare. He believed that impartial care for all people, not just one's family or state, was the foundation of peace. He opposed aggression and luxury, favoring simple living and practical governance. Other schools debated the nature of logic, of language, of destiny. Some studied the stars, others the patterns of human speech. The land was alive with questions. What is the good life? What is justice? How should one live in a world so broken? These thinkers traveled from state to state, seeking audiences with kings and students alike. They debated in courtrooms, taught in village squares, and composed scrolls by candlelight. Though their ideas often contradicted one another, they shared a common aim: to bring meaning to a world that had lost its way. And so, as the kingdoms fought their bloody battles for land and power, another war was being waged in quiet corners, a war of ideas. It was a war without armies, and yet its victors would shape the soul of China for thousands of years. As night falls outside the scholar's window, the ink dries on another line of wisdom. The air is hushed. A single candle flickers in the darkness. The student exhales slowly, rolls the scroll, and places it gently in its case. He does not know if his words will change the world, but he writes them anyway, because the world must change. In the quiet of your own room, centuries and continents away, their voices still reach you. In the teachings of Confucius, in the poetry of the Tao, in the clarity of Mohist thought or the hard truths of legalism, these are echoes of a time when thought became refuge and wisdom became rebellion. Rest a while here, among the sages and the scribes. The world beyond may be fractured, but within these scrolls, within this silence, harmony still lives. Let your thoughts drift now with the brushstrokes of the ancients, and prepare to journey forward toward a ruler who would take the lessons of legalism, forge a mighty empire, and shape China in his own indelible image. The wind has stilled tonight, and the sky is a perfect canvas of quiet stars. Beneath their watchful glow, the land lies vast and silent. Hills rise like sleeping giants. Roads stretch long and straight across the fields. And at the heart of this new world, a single voice commands all others. You are standing at the dawn of a new era, an era forged in steel, in law, and in stone. This is the Qin dynasty, and its ruler, the first emperor, will leave a legacy both magnificent and terrifying. By the late 3rd century BCE, the warring states had bled the land for generations. 7 kingdoms fought endlessly for control, each vying to become the center of a fractured world. Among them, the state of Qin, located in the Western Highlands, rose with unusual strength and resolve. Its rulers were disciplined. Its armies were brutal. Its thinkers, shaped by legalist philosophy, believed in order above all. The man who would change everything was born as Shang, a prince of Qin. By the age of 13, he had become king. By 38, he had conquered all rival states. And in 221 BCE, he declared a new title, Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of China. It was not merely a new dynasty, it was a new vision of the world. The first emperor sought to erase division and create unity, to replace the many with the one. He abolished the old feudal system and divided the empire into commanderies and counties, each overseen by officials directly appointed by the central government. He standardized weights and measures. He imposed a single currency, a single written script, and a unified legal code. Even the width of wagon axles was regulated, so carts could travel seamlessly across the empire's roads. It was a colossal undertaking, but for a brief moment, China was one. Travel now through this empire of stone and vision. The roads are wide and smooth. The rivers are bridged. Couriers race across the land with imperial orders. Everywhere, signs of central authority rise. From majestic halls in Xianyang, the imperial capital, to watchtowers dotting the northern frontier. And then, there is the Great Wall. Not the Great Wall as we know it today, but the beginnings, a patchwork of older regional walls, joined together under Qin command. Built to defend against northern tribes, it stretched like a scar across the mountains and deserts, a monument to endurance and imperial will. Thousands of laborers, convicts and soldiers, toiled under the sun, laying stone upon stone, often at great cost. Many would die during its construction. Their names are lost to history, but their sweat still soaks the soil beneath those ancient stones. Shi Huangdi's obsession with order extended beyond the living. Fearing death, he searched for elixirs of immortality, sending ships to mythical lands in pursuit of eternal life. He feared the chaos of the afterlife as much as he had feared the chaos of the world. So he ordered the construction of a tomb unlike any other, a vast underground palace to mirror his empire above. Buried deep beneath a hill near modern-day Xi'an, the emperor's tomb remains largely sealed. But what we do know has astounded the world. Guarding the tomb is a silent army, the terracotta warriors. Thousands of life-sized soldiers, chariots, and horses, each sculpted with unique features, each standing at eternal attention. Archers, infantrymen, generals. Artists worked day and night to create this clay battalion, arranged in perfect military formation, ready to serve the emperor in death as they did in life. Imagine standing among them now. The air is cool, the earth dimly lit by flickering torches. Rows upon rows of soldiers emerge from shadow, their stone faces calm, their eyes unwavering. It is eerie, majestic, and deeply human, a portrait of one man's fear of oblivion, cast in mud and fire. Yet for all his grand vision, Shi Huangdi's rule was harsh. Books that contradicted state ideology were burned. Scholars who criticized him were buried alive. Taxes were heavy. Labor was forced. His legalist advisors urged efficiency over empathy, control over the compassion. When he died in 210 BCE, the empire began to crumble almost immediately. His son lacked the strength and charisma to hold the vast realm together. Rebellions flared. Provinces broke away. And within just 4 years, the Qin dynasty, so mighty, so centralized, collapsed. But what remained was more than ruins. Though the Qin dynasty was brief, its foundations became the blueprint for all future Chinese empires. The idea of a single China, ruled by a central authority with standardized systems, would endure. Roads, walls, currency, language, these were the bones upon which dynasties would build for centuries to come. And the first emperor, for all his faults, became a symbol of power, of unity, of the terrifying majesty of rule. To some he was a tyrant, to others a visionary. But either way, he could not be forgotten. As you sit quietly now among the silent warriors of the past, the earth feels ancient beneath you. The stars are high above, unchanged by the rise and fall of kings. The road ahead will lead to a gentler age, a time of poetry, trade, and celestial harmony. But for this moment, we rest in the shadow of a man who tried to control even death. Close your eyes for a time. Listen to the stillness. Let the stone soldiers keep watch while you drift. The tomb is sealed. The emperor sleeps. And the next chapter in China's story is ready to awaken with the dawn. The morning mist is soft and cool, curling around temple roofs and drifting lazily across still waters. Bamboo leaves rustle gently overhead. A scholar kneels on a wooden veranda, brush in hand, composing a poem in silence. Somewhere beyond the hills, a caravan bell rings, a soft chime carried from lands far beyond the mountains. This is the world of the Han, where harmony is prized, knowledge revered, and the empire stretches like a dragon waking from slumber. Following the collapse of the Qin, China had once again teetered on the edge of disunity, but from the ashes of rebellion rose a leader of humble origin, Liu Bang's, a former peasant and minor official. Charismatic and pragmatic, he would defeat rival warlords and proclaim himself emperor in 206 BCE. He took the name Emperor Gaozu, and with him the Han Dynasty began. Where the Qin had ruled with an iron fist, the Han sought balance. Legalism was softened by the moral teachings of Confucianism, which Emperor Wu of Han would later make the guiding philosophy of the state. Confucian scholars were welcomed into government, not as warriors, but as administrators, selected by merit and learning, rather than birth. The result was a civil service that valued wisdom, self-discipline, and justice, a model that would inspire imperial systems across Asia for centuries. Imagine now the quiet halls of a Han official's residence. Scrolls line the walls, courtyards are filled with plum trees. Servants bring warm tea. At the heart of the home sits the elder, calm and dignified, his life governed by the rhythms of nature and the values of filial piety, integrity, and harmony. The Han understood that to govern a vast land, one needed more than laws. One needed meaning. And so, Confucianism became more than an ethical code. It became a cosmic order. The emperor was the son of heaven, a sacred link between earth and the divine. The state was a family, the people its children, and the emperor its father. Harmony above, harmony below. But harmony did not mean stagnation. This was a time of expansion and innovation. Under Emperor Wu, who reigned from 141 to 87 BCE, the Han Dynasty reached its greatest territorial extent. The empire pushed deep into Central Asia, absorbing new peoples and forging alliances through both war and diplomacy. To the west, the seeds of something extraordinary were planted, a network of trade routes that would connect China to the farthest reaches of the known world. These were the Silk Roads, stretching from Chang'an, the imperial capital, to the Mediterranean. The Silk Roads were not roads in the modern sense, but a web of overland and maritime pathways. Along them moved caravans laden with silk, jade, spices, ceramics, and lacquerware. In return came horses, glassware, gems, and knowledge. Buddhist monks travelled these paths, carrying scriptures and statues, while foreign envoys brought tales of distant lands, of Persia, of Rome, of India. To walk along the Silk Road in this age is to witness a world in motion. Picture it now. Camel caravans shimmering in the heat of the Gansu corridor. Merchants haggling in bustling oases. The scent of frankincense mingling with the dust. Languages blend in market squares. Stories are traded as easily as silver. And in every bundle of silk, a fragment of Chinese artistry makes its way across mountains, deserts, and seas. Yet the Han did not only look outward, they looked to the stars, to the body, to the spirit. It was a golden age of science and culture. Astronomers mapped the heavens with precision. Physicians compiled texts on medicine and acupuncture. Mathematicians wrote treatises on numbers and geometry. Inventors crafted the seismograph to detect distant earthquakes, an astonishing feat for the time. Paper, too, found its way into history during the Han. Though rudimentary writing surfaces had existed before, it was the Han court official Kai Lun who is traditionally credited with developing a refined method for making paper from mulberry bark, rags, and hemp. With it, learning became lighter, more accessible, and more easily preserved. Meanwhile, literature and philosophy flourished. Poets sang of love and loss. Historians such as Sima Qian chronicled the entirety of China's past in his monumental records of the Grand Historian. His work blended fact with myth, memory with meditation, laying the foundation for centuries of historical writing. And in religion, a quiet transformation was underway. Taoism evolved into an organized spiritual tradition, complete with temples, priests, and sacred texts. Buddhism, newly arrived from India, began to take root, offering new paths to salvation and inner peace. Though it would take centuries to fully bloom, its earliest seeds were planted in Han soil. Life under the Han was not always serene. Border skirmishes, peasant rebellions, and power struggles at court disturbed the calm. Yet even amid these tremors, the dynasty held fast for over 4 centuries. longer than any before it. As the Eastern Han drew to its close in 220 CE, the cracks began to show. Eunuchs at court vied for influence. Natural disasters were interpreted as signs of heaven's discontent. Local warlords grew bold. Eventually, the empire fragmented into 3 rival kingdoms, a story we shall explore soon. But for now, let us linger in this golden twilight. The lanterns of Chang'an glow softly against the falling night. The voices of scholars echo in the academy halls. Far away, a caravan creaks gently through the desert, bound for distant lands. And overhead, the stars still shine, mapped and named by Han astronomers, watched with reverence by emperors and peasants alike. Breathe deeply. Let the harmony of this moment wrap around you like silk. The Han has given the world order, beauty, and wonder, and though the dynasty will fade, its spirit will endure, in scrolls, in stars, and in the steady rhythm of a civilization still growing, still dreaming. Dusk settles over the valley like a silk veil, dimming the colors of the earth. The air is hushed and heavy, as though it too remembers the weight of history. You stand on the edge of a battlefield long overgrown with grass, where banners once flew, and horses once thundered through dust and chaos. The ground beneath your feet is quiet now, but centuries ago it echoed with the footsteps of ambition, loyalty, and betrayal. This is the time of the 3 kingdoms, an age of division, but also one of legend. When the Han Dynasty fell in 220 CE, it did not fall with silence. It cracked slowly, splintering under the strain of court corruption, peasant revolts, and warlord ambitions. At the heart of the empire, the throne was little more than a shadow, held hostage by powerful ministers and eunuchs. In the provinces, generals grew bold and claimed power for themselves. From the wreckage rose 3 competing kingdoms, Wei, Shu, and Wu. Each claimed the right to rule. Each saw itself as the rightful heir to the Han, but none could reunify the realm, and so began a time of war and waiting, a century of shifting alliances, sieges, and sorrow. Yet from this chaos came stories that would capture the imagination of generations to come. Among them, the tale of Liu Bei, the benevolent ruler of Shu, who wept for the people and valued loyalty above all. With him stood the fierce general Guan Yu, known for his unwavering sense of honor, and the clever strategist Zhou Liang, whose wisdom seemed to rival the heavens. These figures, though real, were later elevated to near mythic status in the great historical novel Romance of the 3 Kingdoms, a tapestry of war, intrigue, and virtue woven from the fragments of the past. In contrast stood Cao Cao, ruler of Wei, a brilliant and ruthless warlord. History remembers him both as a tyrant and as a talented poet. He was feared, admired, and resented in equal measure. In the south, Sun Quan ruled over the kingdom of Wu, navigating a treacherous world with pragmatism and resolve. Together, these 3 powers engaged in a long and painful chess game, moving across a fractured board. Battles raged, fortresses changed hands. Great strategies were laid and undone, but even in the darkest hours, moments of humanity flickered through. Poems composed under moonlight, bonds of brotherhood sealed in wine, and final letters written on the eve of battle. Imagine now walking through a forest clearing after a long march. The tents are pitched, the soldiers are quiet, fires crackle, and the stars overhead shine on friend and foe alike. Somewhere, a general sharpens his blade, while another writes a letter home. A commander studies a map, his brow furrowed, not with hate, but with the burden of leadership. This was not a time of simple heroes and villains, but of people struggling to survive and to lead in a world that refused to be still. It was also a time of cultural endurance. Despite the fighting, art, literature, and philosophy continued to thrive. Scholars preserved the teachings of Confucius and Lao Tzu. Historians recorded the chaos with remarkable clarity. Poetry was still written, music still played, and the rhythms of everyday life, farming, trading, praying, continued in towns and villages across the land. The spirit of the Han, though wounded, did not vanish. It lived on in rituals and scrolls, in the longing of the people for unity and peace. But the war could not last forever. Eventually, the state of Jin, led by the Sima family, descended from officials of Wei, overpowered the others, and reunified China in 280 CE. The victory, however, was fleeting. Though the three kingdoms had ended, the land would not know lasting peace for some time. Still, what endured was the story, the romance of the three kingdoms, written many centuries later during the Ming Dynasty, would immortalize this era, not just as a historical period, but as a mythic age. Its tales of strategy and sacrifice, honor and fate, would shape Chinese culture in literature, opera, and even politics. School children would recite its passages, generals would study its battles, and ordinary people would find in its heroes echoes of their own struggles. You may be far from those ancient fields, but the spirit of the three kingdoms lingers, carried on the wind, etched into stone, whispered in the turning of pages. As night deepens once more, listen to the silence of the past. Not all of it was war. There was also love, loyalty, laughter around campfires, songs sung under starlight, and dreams, always dreams, of peace. We now follow the path of belief, for in the next chapter of China's journey, as empires continued to rise and fall, something profound began to stir in temples and caves, in prayer and contemplation. The age of warriors gives way to the age of the soul. The air is thin and cool as you step into a high mountain pass, where the wind whistles through narrow cliffs, and prayer flags flutter gently in the breeze. Below, a winding road snakes through mist-covered valleys. Along this path, monks and merchants travel side by side, their carts creaking softly, their robes trailing dust. On their backs, they carry more than goods. They carry stories, scrolls, statues, and the seeds of a new way of seeing the world. This is a time of movement, of searching, and in the stillness between dynasties, something luminous begins to unfold. In the centuries following the fall of the Han, China once again splintered. The Jin Dynasty, which briefly reunited the realm in 280 CE, soon fell to invasions from northern tribes and internal strife. What followed was a long period of political fragmentation, known as the 16 Kingdoms, and later the Northern and Southern Dynasties. China was no longer one empire, but many, each with its own court, armies, and ambitions. And yet, amid the chaos, something gentle, foreign, and profound began to take root: Buddhism. Originally born in India nearly 1,000 years earlier, Buddhism had traveled eastward along the Silk Roads, passing through Central Asia and into the western reaches of China. At first, it was but a whisper among foreign traders and curious nobles, but slowly, steadily, it spread, carried by monks with shaved heads and saffron robes, by pilgrims returning from distant lands, and by the universal promise it offered, that suffering had a cause and thus a cure. To a land weary from centuries of war and uncertainty, Buddhism brought stillness. It spoke of impermanence, of compassion, of the cycle of rebirth and the path to liberation. Its teachings resonated with the rhythms of Taoism and Confucianism already rooted in Chinese soil, and soon it began to blend with them, forming something uniquely Chinese in spirit. Imagine now stepping into a cave temple carved into a cliff face. The cool stone shelters you from the sun. Walls and ceilings bloom with color. Murals of heavenly bodhisattvas of lotus lakes and endless skies. Monks sit in meditation, the hush of prayer, beads slipping softly through their fingers. The flickering of a single oil lamp reflects in a gilded statue of the Buddha, seated in eternal calm. These are the Yungang and Mogao grottos, masterpieces of early Chinese Buddhist art, born in this very age. Carved by the hands of countless artisans and monks over centuries, they remain silent sanctuaries of beauty and devotion. Buddhism found particular support in the northern dynasties, especially the Northern Wei, who ruled much of northern China from 386 to 534 CE. Though they were of nomadic Xianbai origin, the Northern Wei rulers adopted Chinese customs and saw in Buddhism a unifying spiritual force. Under their patronage, temples were built, sutras translated, and art flourished. The Emperor Xiaowen even ordered the relocation of the capital to Luoyang and embraced Confucian rituals alongside Buddhist ones, a sign of the delicate balance between old and new. Meanwhile, in the southern dynasties, centered around the Yangtze River, a different kind of flowering took place. There, poets and painters created works of ethereal beauty. Calligraphy, considered the highest form of art, reached new levels of refinement. In quiet gardens and moonlit pavilions, scholars composed verses that drifted like mist across a pond, elegant, melancholic, and filled with longing for harmony. Life in this era was complex. War was never far. Dynasties rose and fell with dizzying speed. Yet within this turbulence, Chinese civilization was not eroded. It was reshaped. New cultural forms emerged, old philosophies adapted, and a space opened in the heart of the people for contemplation and transcendence. The most famous Chinese pilgrim of this time was Faxian, who journeyed from China to India in the early 5th century, seeking original Buddhist texts and sacred sites. He crossed deserts, sailed turbulent seas, and walked the dusty roads of northern India. When he returned home, he brought with him not only scriptures, but a deeper understanding of the teachings he had long revered. His journey was one of faith and curiosity, a bridge between worlds. Buddhist philosophy, once foreign, now breathed in Chinese metaphors. The Lotus Sutra, the Heart Sutra, and the stories of the Buddha's life were translated and retold with elegance. Temples dotted the landscape. Monks debated the nature of reality, and the idea of compassion, a love that asks for nothing, softened the edge of centuries of conflict. But Buddhism was not without challenge. Some Confucian scholars saw monastic life as a threat to family and social order. Taoists debated its origins and meanings, and emperors, wary of temples growing wealthy and independent, occasionally cracked down on the growing monastic population. Yet, despite these tensions, Buddhism endured, rooted not just in palaces and monasteries, but in the hearts of farmers, merchants, and poets. As the 6th century drew to a close, China stood once more on the edge of change. The northern and southern realms, long divided, would soon be brought together. And from that reunion would rise a dynasty that looked both backward to unify the past and forward to shape a glorious future. But for now, rest here, beneath the painted ceilings of a quiet grotto. Listen to the drip of water echo through stone. Watch as golden light dances across the face of a meditating Buddha. The chaos outside may rage on, but within this stillness, a truth remains. In silence there is strength. In emptiness, potential. In compassion, the bridge between suffering and peace. Let us rise now with the dawn, for the age of fragmentation is ending, and the age of grand unification, of poetry, canals, and golden courts, is waiting just beyond the mountain. The morning breaks slowly over an empire reborn. First comes a pale glow behind distant hills, softening the edges of temples and pavilions. Then, golden light spills across stone bridges, crowded markets, and serene canals. You find yourself in the heart of a great capital, its streets wide, its towers tall, its people full of purpose. This is not a memory of greatness, but its return. The land has been reunited. The long centuries of division have come to an end. And in their place, the Sui and Tang dynasties rise, building not just roads and palaces, but the cultural soul of a superpower. The Sui dynasty, though brief, was the spark. In 581 CE, Emperor Wen of Sui seized control of northern China and methodically extended his reach southward. By 589, the nation was once again unified for the first time in nearly 300 years. A devout Buddhist and visionary ruler, Emperor Wen restructured the bureaucracy, restored central governance, and reduced the power of hereditary nobility. Yet perhaps his most enduring legacy was one of infrastructure, the construction of the Grand Canal. Stretching over 1,100 miles, this monumental feat connected the fertile Yangtze River Valley in the south to the bustling northern cities. Grain could now move swiftly to the capital. Troops could be transported. Trade flowed like water through the veins of the empire. Even today, parts of the Grand Canal remain in use, testament to a vision that bound the land as one. But the Sui were ambitious to a fault. Massive military campaigns against Korea drained the treasury and the people's patience. Public works, projects, while glorious, were punishing. Rebellions broke out, and by 618 CE, the dynasty collapsed as quickly as it had risen. Out of the ashes came a new force, one that would shine brighter than any before it. The Tang Dynasty, founded by Li Yuan, would reign over a golden age of Chinese civilization. For nearly 300 years, from 618 to 907 CE, the Tang oversaw a flourishing of culture, art, innovation, and global influence that would set the tone for China's identity for centuries. Their capital, Chang'an, was the most cosmopolitan city on earth. Its broad avenues and walled wards teemed with merchants, musicians, diplomats, and pilgrims from across the world: India, Persia, Arabia, even Byzantium. It was a city of temples and gardens, of bustling markets and solemn academies, of lantern festivals that lit up the night like stars scattered across the earth. The Tang court was a stage of grandeur and grace. Silk robes shimmered in candlelight. The air was perfumed with incense and poetry. Empress Wu Zetian, the only woman in Chinese history to rule in her own name, rose during this era, a powerful and controversial figure who elevated Buddhism, expanded education, and demonstrated that the throne could be shaped by wit as much as by bloodline. Art and literature soared. Painters captured the delicate sway of willows, the vastness of mountain landscapes, and the warmth of intimate scenes. Calligraphers danced ink across scrolls in gestures of elegance and meaning, and poetry reached its zenith. Poets like Li Bai, Du Fu, and Wang Wei gave voice to the human soul, its joys, its sorrows, its longing for beauty and peace. Their verses spoke of moonlit wine, autumn winds, drifting boats, and the ache of distance. They captured the tenderness of fleeting moments and the grandeur of timeless truths. Even today, their words whisper through time. The moonlight before my bed, could it be frost on the floor? I lift my head to view the moon, then lower it, thinking of home. These were not just poems, they were prayers, gentle offerings to memory, nature, and the fragile thread of life. Beyond art, the Tang Dynasty expanded China's global reach. Through the Silk Road, Tang China became the heart of a vast network connecting east and west. Alongside silk and porcelain flowed ideas, religions, and technologies. Buddhism flourished, Taoism adapted, and Islam and Nestorian Christianity found quiet corners of welcome. Foreign envoys bowed at court. Traders brought stories of distant lands, and the empire, confident and open, listened. The government too refined its systems. The imperial examination system grew more sophisticated, allowing scholars of talent, not just birth, to rise in service of the state. It was a meritocracy rooted in Confucian learning, but open enough to allow brilliance from unexpected places. Still, no golden age is eternal. By the 9th century, internal corruption, eunuch dominance at court, and regional warlords weakened the state. A devastating rebellion, led by Lushan, tore through the empire and left lasting scars. Though the Tang survived for another century, its power faded. By 907, the dynasty ended, and China once again entered a period of fragmentation. But the Tang spirit would never be lost. Its art, its language, its values and achievements became the blueprint for future dynasties, for neighboring cultures, and for generations of dreamers. The vision of unity and balance, of beauty and intellect, of roads connecting worlds and words connecting hearts, that vision endured. Now, as you stand once more beneath the stars, the great journey of ancient China draws to a close. The empires have risen and fallen, rivers have flooded and calmed, scribes have written, temples have echoed with chants, and in the hush between centuries, a civilization has taken shape, layer by layer, moment by moment. You are not merely looking back, you are standing within the long breath of history. Let your thoughts drift through Chang'an's lantern-lit streets. Let them rest beside a poet by a riverbank, or walk the echoing corridors of a jade-colored temple. Let the silence of 1,000 years carry you gently into sleep. If you're still awake, let your thoughts fade like mist across the plain, and let rest find you softly and slowly. Or if you're still full of quiet curiosity, why not journey onward with one of our other videos? Wherever you are, thank you for listening, and until next time, sleep well.